Over to you, Brian.
Right, thank you. Thanks very much indeed, Martin. It's really good to be following Thomas. It's always a challenge because he always says all the right things, and I am thrilled to see at long last, Thomas, you and I will remember the dark days when we thought no one was ever listening to you or me. And eventually now the sort of dam is breaking. And I think you absolutely deserve the success that you're beginning to have. Much more will follow, I'm sure. And we're delighted to have you as one of our founder members of the Alliance for so many years. What I want to do is start off by simply saying this. It is great to hear people like Professor O'Neill and Thomas and others speaking. What strikes me is that, just to reflect just for a few moments, 10 years ago when I decided to start the ECHAlliance, someone asked me yesterday when I was doing another presentation, why did you do this? There are times when I've thought to myself, yeah, why did you? Because there are times it feels like it's 100 years since we started, but it's only 10. Some of those years have passed quickly, others have passed. And a bit like Thomas was saying, that you sometimes have to keep persistently telling people what you think they ought to know already, and you just cannot give up. And I started this really for three reasons. One was that I was in one of my many retirements. I'm now in my fourth retirement, and I was in my retirement and needed something to do. That was the first thing. The second thing was that you mentioned, you saw on one of your slides there, a box, because the only way to currently is sometimes to carry a box of your medical record with you. A very close friend of mine in New York, who I'm pleased to say is still alive, used to carry 2 boxes with him around various consultants in New York, because it's the only way he could get them to understand. He had to go through every time with a new consultant a new box of records. And of course, that meant delays, and he always missed actually what turned out to be eventually open heart surgery, because it could have been diagnosed 2 years before. And the third reason was that I kept meeting brilliant people with brilliant ideas all over the world. But what was interesting was they sometimes didn't know what was happening down the road. What was even more interesting was that many of them didn't even know what was happening in their own building. I remember in Finland, which I think is a fabulous country and progressive country, meeting a professor in Tampere in Finland at a physical conference. Do you remember the days we used to be able to do that? And I said, oh, you must know this other professor. And she said, why? I said, because she works in the same university as you do. Yeah, but we're a big university, 5 campuses. And I said, yeah, but she works in the same campus as you. Eventually, when the other lady came over, we discovered that they both worked in the same building, been there 5 years, one on the 4th, one on the 5th floor, working on the same area, publishing separate papers on the same topics, and had never met. So that was a perfect example to me. Is what you need now is a connector. You need somebody who's going to take on the onerous task, and it is difficult and hard work, to bring together the different elements of an ecosystem. And they include governments. And that isn't just necessarily the health department of governments, but sometimes the economy department of governments. Very often you've got to bring in the social care aspects of that, because often that is in a different organization, whether in England in councils or in many cases separate ministries in different countries. Then you have to bring in the operators, the people who actually run the health system, both public and private. And we all know in many countries there's a huge gap between the public and private in terms of even communication and speaking to each other. Then you've got to bring in the patients. So we have made a great effort that instead of showing slides which always have the patients at the center in the middle of a PowerPoint slide, I always ask, is there anything behind that? Because often it's just the right thing to do is to put the patient at the center, but putting them at the center of a PowerPoint doesn't actually make much difference to them. So we work closely with the rare diseases organizations, the World Federation for Incontinent Patients, and many other patient groups to engage them directly in the ecosystem of health and care. We also talk, of course, of venture capital companies, private equity companies, health insurance companies, etc. We then realized there was no point in getting people. How do you get people to speak to each other, to listen to each other, to understand what they're doing? Now, you might think that's easy. Well, you try it. It's taken me 10 years to get to the point where we actually have, and maybe move on to the next slide, Ross, we now have built our form of ecosystem, which is that we believe that you have to have permanent multi-stakeholder communities in different parts of the world. And we have 70 of these now. Now, you might think that's really great achievement. It is, but frankly, we're still at the starting point. But what we have learned is that by giving people a permanence, that is, they meet every 3 or 4 months, they build relationships. Competitors often work together. Governments start to understand what's available to them out in the market, because many procurement departments in government, and we know this because we actually mentor some of these procurement departments, don't know what's going on in the world. They may not know what Thomas is offering or any of our other 800 odd members are offering. So there are solutions out there. But of course, if the procurement department doesn't know in advance, they will never tender for that particular area. Often what happens is you have to persuade the governments, the health systems, and the procurement department that there is an answer out there. And therefore tenders will get proper, sensible, qualified responses. So we've built this over the last number of years. We started as the European Connected Health Alliance, because at that stage, my ambitions, albeit there was only me in the company, were at least for Europe. And I'm still a great believer in Europe. But of course, we had the Brexit. And at that time, I thought our membership of UK organisations would drop and we would be less attractive to UK and indeed to European members. The opposite has been true. We've actually had a real determination by new members as well to maintain the connections across Europe, because politicians can make lots of decisions, but other organizations like research organizations, etc., want to maintain those very valuable connections built up over many, many years. And I should say as well, they want to maintain the human connection in all of this. So we've built this over the last while. The COVID period has accelerated us as well. As Martin was saying about Latin America, when COVID started, I remember sitting at my desk where I am at the moment and saying, I'm not going to be able to travel. I thought it was going to be for 3 months. So it shows you how good I am at forecasting. But I realized then that I had to do something. And I set myself the challenge of creating the global connector. And I did that not by trying to do it all myself, but as we always do, collaborate with people. Go out and talk to people. Now, we had already been doing that for 10, 15 years. So we immediately recruited like-minded organizations who cover a different part of the world from us. People like the American Telemedicine Association, a group called Health in the US. We then moved to Africa, where we work with the African Healthcare Federation. Then moved to the Commonwealth, the old British Commonwealth, 53 countries. Moved to Australia, the Australian Digital Health Agency. And various other countries started to come along. And as you said, Martin, we managed to get Latin America off the ground. It's a country, a continent I've never been to. But we now have many, many friends, and it is largely run by our Spanish ecosystems and indeed our Portuguese ecosystem for Brazil. What we find during COVID is there was a real acceleration in people's desire to be connected, because lots of information was coming out. As Professor O'Neill said, some of it was false on COVID itself, but there are all sorts of stories circulating. Wouldn't it be much better if we actually knew somebody in the country that people were talking about? So we created this global health connector, and that has now created a whole new movement of people being able to disseminate information, to identify opportunities, and then to make them happen because they know human beings at the other end of the connector. So that only started a year and a half ago, but already we're having our first summit of that in Boston in October, virtually in our case. And what I would say is that the desire to connect is even stronger now than it was pre-COVID. People no longer think, some people still do, and some of those I just give up on. But others who are broader minded and more strategic realize that you cannot do things on your own. How can a company sell to all those countries if they have no connections in those countries? And therefore we have created this organization, and that's just a snapshot of the current ecosystems. We probably have 250, 300 meetings a year, most of them virtual still, across the globe. And that's what we offer our members and our community. Maybe if we move quickly on so as to keep the time, we look at the next slide, Ross. And what we discover from listening to this, what I call an intelligence network, listening, not always talking, but listening to our ecosystem coordinators. They meet on a monthly basis virtually. At the last meeting, with 53 of those coordinators were able to make that call. Think about the opportunity for us as the Alliance to gather intelligence and information about their priorities, their progress, their failures, their successes. So we're able to identify areas of need, because we believe you have to lead with the need, and solutions will be found, as we've discovered. So we then realize we need to have cross-border ecosystems as well. We call them TIEs, thematic innovation ecosystems, to use European language. And what we're discovering already is that when you look at the areas there, like procurement, like the old one, it's been around forever, integrated care. You look at housing, which is very much part of the overall system. We look at the skills for health, where there's a huge shortage throughout the world. And I know this because of my involvement in care companies in Ireland and England. These allow us to bring together 15 or 20 countries to actually talk about the issues, identify the needs, look for solutions, and that helps us to engage and produce opportunities for our members. Now, it is hard work. All of this has taken us 10 years. This year is our 10th anniversary. I'm really looking forward to the next 10 years, and we have been thrilled with the support we've got from our members, from the communities, and more we're now getting, particularly governments, coming to us saying, we want to connect across the world. We want, and as an example, Martin, I've always admired what you have done, and I'm thrilled to hear of your new involvement with Yvonne and the team there, because it's a natural fit, that you can't transform something without innovation. You can't transform something without innovation and buy-in from the levers of power, and that's clearly where you are. And what I would say is, when you look at your push to get international connections and learn from people, that's exactly what you and I have talked about, of actually us as the Alliance taking what you have done and making sure that people around the world not only know about it, because communication only does a certain amount, but rather we introduce you to individuals who we know have got the same interests as you, and that means you can build the business on top of that. So all I would say is, so far so good. I'm thrilled there's lots of innovators around, because you keep going. I have no worries about innovation. Innovation always is there. I just hope we can open more and more doors for many of the people there. So I'll leave it at that to try to save a bit of time. Thanks very much for listening.
That's great, Brian, and really appreciate the talk. And actually, I think, heartfelt thanks for you taking the role to actually be that global connector. It's we try and be a connector in Ireland, and that is it is a hard job. So doing that globally, it's order of magnitudes more difficult. But hopefully our journeys will continue to intertwine, and
Yep.
no doubt we'll have you back at our Digital Academy Forum to speak. So thanks.
Thank you.